Welcome to Magnify Your Message. Inspiration magnified.
I had what we would call a very difficult psychedelic medicine experience. I had an experience of, my own death over and over and over again, and some insights on the other side of walking through this intense experience that I felt like I needed to integrate.
I cannot wait to introduce you to today's guest, Ben Doc Askins. Now, if you've ever wondered what it would take to combine the wild with the therapeutic, Doc is your guy. His decades long career has spanned from being a psychiatric physician assistant to his time in the military to psychedelic assisted therapy. Boy, his career has traversed a truly unique spectrum. Today, we dive into Doc's incredible story from being a combat medic in the military to becoming an advocate for mental health and truly a pioneer in psychedelic assisted therapy. His journey is all about embracing every aspect of who we are, the light and the dark. I cannot wait for you to hear his conversation. So let's dive into it. Here we go. Ben Doc Askins. Woo! I'm a fan. Thank you for
Pleasure to
being
be
here.
here. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
What a treat. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, very mysterious fellow for sure. I like to go by the psychedelic science war storyteller, which is a mouthful, but you can unpack that throughout the episode here. I was one of the last soldiers out of Iraq in December 2011, and then I was one of the first soldiers trained to do psychedelic assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress in 2022. And my story kind of swirls around a lot of trauma and healing, and I'm sure we'll get into the details there as the conversation unfolds.
You can better believe we will be getting into all of it. And without further ado, how in the dickens did you come in? I mean,
Yeah,
literally, without further ado, please do tell.
I grew up, my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and I like to describe it as a very loving, but occasionally surprisingly violent household, which I think is something that a lot of folks today recognize in the past for themselves, and a lot of veterans as well come out of, some complicated home situations. I turned that into a lot of motivation and energy and played a lot of sports in high school, football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, track, boxing, etc. And after finishing high school, I went into college and studied outdoor education and intercultural studies, which is a mouthful again to say, but I had a little stint doing work overseas, climbing rocks in other countries, just was chasing adventures and trying to live a fun life. And September 11th happened, which was a landmark event in our nation's history, and a lot of people decided to join up and serve at that particular point. I finished college and signed up to be a combat medic in the Army National Guard. That's where I earned the nickname Doc, was I spent a decade as a combat medic, including that deployment to Iraq that I mentioned earlier. And I was okay enough at medicine that I earned a slot in what's called the Inter-Service Physician Assistant Program, or IPAP, which is the Army's PA, the Department of Defense's PA program. And my life kind of changed in the middle of that program. I had a significant event I'll tell you about. You could probably pick up from the story so far as a bit of an adrenaline junkie, enjoyed the adventure sports and being outdoors and having a lot of fun. And being a combat medic was definitely a high intensity occupation along the way, and was planning a career in emergency medicine after finishing PA school. I was working in my emergency medicine rotation at Fort Campbell in the ER there, Blanchfield Army Community Hospital, when I got a call from an old friend about the former executive officer for one of our units. A good friend of mine had died by suicide the day before. And just broke my heart. He was a great leader, a great man, a husband, a father, and he had a bunch of his own struggles that got the better of him on a particular day. And you don't get a whole lot of time to grieve whenever you're a soldier in physician assistant school. So I did what I usually do and got up the next morning and went to work. And I went into the ER, and one of the first cases that came rolling in via ambulance was a lovely young lady who had an intentional drug overdose. She'd taken everything in her medicine cabinet and decided she didn't want to be here anymore. And I knew what to do in terms of emergency medicine to take care of her. As part of the team, we intubated her and stabilized her respirations and got her, kept her alive. But I knew, from doing my homework that the prognosis isn't great, both psychologically and medically, for somebody who has a first suicide attempt. How, much damage did the medicines do to her brain? How well was she going to come out of this thing? And being confronted by an attempted suicide right in front of me the day after losing my friend was very intense for me. I neglected to mention that along the way, as a combat medic, I earned a Master of Divinity degree and was looking into going into the ministry of some kind, maybe Bible translation and other places, but wasn't as great at that as I was at being an adrenaline junkie. I like to cuss and fight a little bit too much to fit in with the ministers, but I got the degree along the way anyway, and used that as kind of a Jedi mind trick on the chief of the emergency room to say, hey, I want to go with the chaplain and talk to this young lady's family instead of just jumping right back into taking ER cases. And he went along with that idea, walked into the room, and I could have been looking in a mirror. Like, this guy could have been me. His daughter was the same age as my daughter. I wound up sitting with him in that room, just grieving alongside of him. And something inside me broke. And I don't know if anything's ever going to fix it, but I decided at that moment that I was going to forego the emergency medicine career and try to go into mental health and do something about preventing suicide if I could. I didn't understand all that would be entailed in that. It's a very complex problem for sure, but sometimes you find your calling by the things that you love and enjoy, and sometimes it's the things that break your heart, and suicide breaks my heart. So finished PA school, knock knock on the top of my class for what that was worth, and managed to land a job with a
Wow,
good
for a guy
friend.
who's okay in medicine. I forgot.
Yeah, I'm the okayest physician assistant that you'll ever meet for sure.
I forgot how you
Um,
said that earlier. Yeah, the DOD said I was okay enough at medicine.
try, trying to be good enough. That's all I'm doing every
Oh,
day.
God,
Yep.
Ben. Okay, keep going.
And I went straight into a psychiatry job after school, which was February of 2020. And you may recall that March of 2020, there was a significant global event that took place with the COVID pandemic that shut down the world, which was a super weird time to be starting a medical career. And I was fortunate enough, the friend and mentor that hired me out of school was a very proficient psychiatrist that was already doing what's called ketamine-assisted therapy out of his psychiatry practice, ketamine being the only legally available sort of psychedelic medicine to be
Right.
used in psychiatry. And we wound up managing a lot of very acutely suicidal people in an outpatient setting from our clinic that maybe you might have wanted to put into the hospital for the level of suicidality that they were showing. But at that time, we didn't know much about COVID. So putting people into
Mhm.
the hospital felt like a death sentence. So another baptism by fire for me. Wound up trying to take care of as many people as I could in that suicidal headspace using a mix of traditional psychiatry and ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
Boy, you chose a couple of cataclysmic global events, 9/11 and the pandemic. Uh,
Yeah, we all had to make our way around those things sometimes, and I tried to swing for the fences and do the most good that I possibly can wherever I am, and that's what I was shooting for.
wow. And so how did you move from ketamine into, like, I'm paraphrasing, but, somewhat psychedelic, to full psychedelics?
So I practiced in psychiatry here in Louisville, Kentucky, in that practice until 2021, so a little over a year. And then my unit, I'm still in the Army National Guard, was got what's called a notification of sourcing for a deployment to Europe. So I spent most of 2022 deployed with an infantry battalion over to Kosovo, which meant having to shut down the mental health practice and going back into sort of the more adrenaline junkie emergency medicine mentality there. And had, to get my family ready for that. It was a difficult period to head overseas, and then came back from that deployment and my changed jobs to a different employer, and that employer sent me to what's called the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies training program for MDMA assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. So 3 months after that deployment, I was certified to do MDMA assisted therapy, and I've integrated that approach for doing therapy into my own ketamine assisted therapy practice here in Louisville, so that we're combining the only legally available medicine with a very robust approach to therapy for people. And I see really great outcomes for a whole lot of folks across all walks of life.
What percentage of the people that you work with are vets?
So in private practice, there's some obstacles where a lot of folks prefer to go to the VA because it's free, but then VA approaches, especially here, but in most places, are treatment as usual. And there's about a third of people who get put on the right medicine the first time around, and a third of people who get put on the right medicine the second time around. And of the other third of people, those are the people that wind up coming to find me more often than not in terms of seeking out alternative treatment options. I'd recommend seeking that treatment option a bit earlier, potentially in the course of struggling with trauma or depression or anxiety. But I wind up working with whoever walks through the door, and a percentage of those folks are veterans who, that's my tribe. I love those folks.
Yes. Boy, I can't, it's, I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that you've been in these situations where PTSD is created and now you're helping to unwind it. I
Sure.
can't imagine anybody better suited to do what you do than someone who's seen it all and witnessed it and likely experienced all that in whatever regard. As you look at your approach versus what else is out there, I just, it's so often the people that I'm blessed to meet are people who do something different. They're the front edge of the bell curve like you are. I mean, it's the recognition now that psychedelic assisted therapy for PTSD is getting is amazing, and yet so many don't have access to that.
Right. I've been very fortunate along the way. It sounds, when I tell the story this way, like I had some kind of great plans and achieved everything on the old bucket list, and that would not be an accurate portrayal of the way that I've kind of put the plane together in flight over and over again throughout my life. And I shy away from trying to pretend that everything that I do is magical or everything I touch turns to gold. I had about 10 years there in between my deployment to Iraq and the later deployment to Kosovo, where I had plenty of my own trauma that was unresolved from my childhood and from going to war, where, the only way I was managing a whole lot of things was with drinking and not talking about it, because that's how people like me tend to handle our problems. And I had to go on my own healing journey before, I was providing ketamine assisted therapy to people in the psychiatry clinic in Louisville during the day, had no experience with the medicine myself, and going home and drinking and not really enjoying my life, and just going back the next day hoping that nobody would die by suicide in front of me or anything. So it was definitely a very difficult journey for me. And then I've sought out treatment from colleagues in that regard, and have experienced a great deal of my own healing through ketamine assisted therapy. And am grateful to be sober for the last 2.5 years. I haven't had a drink since before I went on the deployment to Kosovo in 2022. And just being able to tell some of my patients, hey, I'm not, the guy in the white coat here telling you what's right and what's wrong and what you need to do, but that I'm on this journey too. We in psychedelic assisted therapy like to say that we are the medicine, that there's, an element of taking psychedelics that can augment and accelerate healing in very unique and headline grabbing sorts of ways, but there's a lot of work to be done around those, brief experiences with the medicine. And in that therapy is where a lot of the healing actually takes place. Yes, it gets called 10 years of therapy in just a few days, but you still need a whole lot of actual therapy. And tons of us like me need more than 10 years of therapy in a few days anyway. So
So, what do your patients say when you reveal that to them, that you are someone who's got your own struggles?
I think it makes me a lot more approachable. I think it makes it so that, we're all just humans. I have this I have my own podcast that I call the Anti-Hero's Journey podcast. You may be familiar with the famous Joseph Campbell hero's journey cycle of, call, initiation, separation, and return that virtually every good movie and story and even religious text has some elements of that going on there. And I decided to, write a book and start a podcast about this thing I call the Anti-Hero's Journey, which is integrating everything that it is to be a human being in the first place. Like the concept of a hero is valuable, and I think we need heroes for sure, but it always entails a villain finding something awful that's happening out there. And we have to recognize that any aspect of the human experience is available to every single one of us, from the most angelic to the most evil things that happen. We have that range as people, and integrating everything that it is to be frail and flawed and arrogant and terrible sometimes, and to be self-sacrificing and compassionate and giving, and at the same time bringing all of those things together, the light and the shadow, is what I call being an anti-hero, being a whole lot more complicated than just the white hat, black hat, hero versus villain, good guy, bad guy stuff that we all get raised on for good reasons. But I think growing up involves integrating a whole lot more of that, and making my story known to my patients is a way that helps them to heal in their own ways, not by necessarily emulating me as the hero and just do what I do and you'll get better, but you be your own hero. You figure out your own way of being a guru, because it's going to be different. And teaching people to trust their own intuition, and teaching people that they have some healing intelligence inside of them that they can trust, is a big part of growing out of the patterns of thinking and behaving that we call anxiety and depression and traumatic stress.
Being willing to share your own journey is, I don't think there's a bigger gift you can give people. It grants being to anybody who hears it. And what a grace to give your patients. It's I think, I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, God, if only where would I be now if only I had had you after being kidnapped and trying to invent the wheel,
Right?
because I wasn't telling anybody and I was traumatized and I didn't like men. I didn't like people. I didn't like crowds. I didn't like myself. I didn't, the world just started becoming very small.
Yeah.
And man, to have someone say, "Oh, I'm imperfect," when I thought that the biggest problem I faced at the time was that I was now scarred, ruined,
Mhm.
you know, and that everybody else who's, because everybody else is perfect,
Right.
thinking of a child, but everybody, all these perfect people will never accept me. Geez, what a gift you give.
That's the
Oh,
intent every chance I get. I'm doing my best, but we all fumble and fail and make some mistakes along the way. And I think that's what we're making room for over and over again is what allows us to be fully ourselves, to let some of the walls down, to stop protecting yourself all the time. That's what a ton of the service that I provide winds up being is a safe space. You feel safe enough to do the work that's necessary to heal and then to grow and then to develop. So I work, with some of the most acutely suicidal people out there on one end of the spectrum. And then I also have, very successful people who still have plenty of problems. So it's never as simple as, like what's your GPA or what's your average income or those sorts of things. Everybody's got problems to work through. Get professional athletes that fly in here just to do some of this work around having some, post-traumatic stress around a particular pass pattern where they got their bell rung playing football or any of those sorts of things. There's a whole bunch of options available for becoming fully human,
Yes.
is what I like to call it.
Wow. It's so inspiring. What in drove you to create your own podcast and to get out in the media and to share this with a larger group of people?
Yeah, I had what we would call a very difficult psychedelic medicine experience where, people will call them quote unquote bad trips. I don't know that that's a real thing, but it was a very intense session where I had an experience of, my own death over and over and over again, and some insights on the other side of walking through this intense experience, and that I felt like I needed to integrate to make sense out of what just happened to me. And for about 2 weeks straight, oddly enough, I couldn't get to sleep until I wrote down the ideas that were in my head. I just had to kind of download. And that's what in the psychedelic world they call it is downloads. You just get all this information that you got to get out there somehow. So I wrote this book that's, my life story told as if it's a psychedelic assisted therapy session. So it's kind of a wild ride. It channels a little bit of Hunter S. Thompson's Gonzo style of journalism from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but there's a lot of, you know, humor and, there's some tragedies that I've endured, and I tried to put all of that down in about 150 pages while I couldn't sleep. So it was just 2 weeks of, I got to get this out of my head. And by the time it was done, I was like, I think this is a book. I think I'm going to just try to get it published. So I put that out there last year called The Anti-Hero's Journey, The Zero with a Thousand Faces. And it was getting to the other side of working through that difficult experience and writing down that book. I got kind of bored with my own stories and felt like I just wanted to be of service to a lot of other people's stories at that point, which was when I decided to open my own private practice independently, to see patients the way that I think is the best way to approach healing, and decided to start a podcast just to invite other people onto it and hear their stories because I was kind of sick of my own stuff. I wanted to hear what was going on with a whole bunch of other people, like what you're doing right now, like tell me your story. I just want to hear all these stories. The psychedelic science war storyteller was the byline. I felt like I got over a whole bunch of the struggles and the problems that I was having. Not that I'm completely healed or some kind of enlightened guru or any of that sort of nonsense. I'm not sure that those things exist. And if they do, that you're certainly not going to find them, in my house. But I do enjoy getting the opportunity to talk to some pretty cool people and to put out their information on my podcast too.
The whole anti-hero's journey is so captivating. As a when I was a young writer starting out in Hollywood, it was everyone talked Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Every pitch meeting, every story meeting, all of it. So I was like, oh yeah, Joseph Campbell, Joseph Campbell. It became the Bible. I mean, there's
Right,
books that break that down and how to implement it into screenplays. M- it's the whole way that you write. You have to write from that perspective,
right.
but it's hearing you say it in such an integrated way, what the anti-hero is. It's not at all what I imagine an anti-hero is the way you do it. It's such an integrated whole
I
human.
like to jokingly say that the hero's journey is a lovely children's story, but when you're ready to grow up, come check out the anti-hero's journey.
Ah, so good. Oh, as I'm sitting here uh, talking with you, there's the audio side of the podcast. And yes, we're recording video as well for wherever we'll post on video, but my cheeks hurt, and that just won't translate into just the audio portion. So I wanted to say it. You're fascinating. Every
You.
time we've had an interaction, you make such a difference for people. And you're fascinating, and your transparency and your willingness to be an anti-hero
Mhm.
and then beat carve a pathway out so that others can follow that. It's just so inspiring.
I do think, it's the next sort of stage for us, not to oversell it or anything, but I think it's kind of in the water, in the culture. People are getting to where they understand the concept a little bit better. I can obviously credit that to Taylor Swift and the old anti-hero song, right? That's a lot bigger deal than me and any of my nonsense. But even the Deadpool and Wolverine movie is now like the highest grossing R-rated film out there, right? And Deadpool's not really a hero. He has the suit and looks like one, but he does an awful lot of shady stuff along the way too, right? And that's all part of being a human. That's what I take to be an anti-hero, is someone who could look really heroic on a Monday, doing a whole lot of work. I still pull some shifts in the emergency room, and you might mistake me for that along the way. And then on Tuesday, I might be a real jerk, not sleep so well, and just act like a moron, say something terrible to my wife, and have to apologize for it later. Like, that whole range is out there. And I think bring it in the shadow, bring it in the light, making room for everything that you are at the table is what it means to be an anti-hero. And we're ready for it. I think the world's hungry for a whole lot more of that in stories, in the news, in the world today. Like, let's bring all the anti-heroes out.
Yes. The m- my access to something similar was after the kidnapping. I lived in Japan and learned this principle called wabi sabi.
Ah, yeah.
And I'd never heard anything like it. It states that the beauty, if any of you haven't heard it, the beauty of any object, the perfection of anything, any object, lies in its flaws.
Mm-hmm.
So something can only be seen to be beautiful to a correlate degree to which it is damaged.
Mm. The little asymmetries that make it exactly what it
Right.
is.
That was mind-boggling to think that that could apply to a human.
Right.
At first, when I learned the principle, they were talking about a table, but I wanted to extrapolate. I wanted that it would apply to human beings. And as you're talking about this anti-hero archetype,
Mm-hmm.
it grants that same sort of space to just be, in the same way that Wabi Sabi had granted that for me all those years ago. And God, it was a gift. And I can hear the gift that it is that you're providing for people in your work, and the whole notion of integrating dark and light and imperfection and all of it. Yay. You are my anti-hero.
There it is. Thank you. That's all I wanted to hear. We can wrap. There we go.
That is freaking fantastic. Oh
Nice.
God, you're so great. Wow.
Thank you.
Where can people learn about you?
If they want to learn about me in my private practice, they can look at my website. It's advancedpracticeproviders.com. And I do some collaborative work with some colleagues here in Louisville at psychedelicsoflouisville.com. And then any info about my book or my podcast or all my non-professional nonsense is at antiheroesjourney.com.
Fantastic. I'll put all of that in the episode notes.
Thank you.
What else do you want to leave us with today?
I just think that gratefulness is a really important piece of integration and growth and healing. And it's whenever you start to become grateful for your scars that you are fully healed. Like the scar can be there and you can hate it, and that's the last thing hanging out there for healing to take place. So I'm really grateful for you. I'm really grateful for the ways that you give people the opportunity to shine, and I'm grateful for you inviting me on your podcast today, Cheryl.
And Doc Askins. Oh, you were a gift. Thank
Thank
you.
you. My pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Magnify Your Message podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Ben Doc Askins. His insights on mental health, integrative psychiatry, the power of psychedelic-assisted therapy, it's all so inspiring. To learn even more, click the links in the episode notes. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with everyone that you feel it would benefit. Thank you in advance. And when you're ready to share your story and your work with the world, I can help. Visit CherylHunter.com to learn how. I am Cheryl Hunter, and until next time, know that your message has the power to change the world.